Did you know that the police in Boston were broadcasting, "This is a drill, this is a drill," on bullhorns during the marathon? That the Boston Globe was tweeting that a demonstration bomb would be set off during the marathon for the benefit of bomb squad activities, and that one would be set off in 1 minute in front of the library, which happened as the Globe had announced. That peering through the smoke, you could see bodies with missing arms and legs, but there was no blood. That the blood only showed up later and came out of a tube. That they used amputee actors in a studio-quality smoke machine. That the prosecution of the brothers, blaming them for the crime, was staged. Don't let yourself be played. Check out. And nobody died in Boston either.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you'd like to find out why the Boston Marathon is one of the most embarrassing, laughable hoaxes ever perpetrated on the American people, then go to patriotradiobooks.com. That's patriotradiobooks.com.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being purposely dynamited and blown.
When we are successful, I'm just a patsy, and we will be.
Ready to make to come to the microphone, so they'll listen up.
A new world order.
So my name's Robbie Parker.
It might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m.
Live from the Media Broadcasting Center.
Welcoming back Carl Herman to The Real Deal, where we're continuing our 4-part series on the rogue state empire, which is what the United States of America has turned into in the late 20th and the 21st century. Carl, it's appalling. I think you're doing yeoman service here in explaining this for the benefit of the American people.
Yeah, I would like to use this 4-part series that we're doing as an introduction and the possibility that if we win, Jim, we're going to have about 1 million educational professionals in the public school area looking for some sort of introduction of what happened. And this will benefit the tens of millions of American children. That's my intent. We are talking about the rogue state empire, and as a national board certified teacher, to give a little recap and context to what we're doing today for public education. If people recognize the rogue state empire, they would withdraw their consent. 95% plus of human beings just want cooperative competition. And if they really understood the facts, which you and I as academic professionals, we're just saying that this is objective data that anybody can go ahead and check. So here we go. Let's take a look at what we have so far. You see the screen okay?
Yes.
All right, so this is where people can go ahead and pause the video at any time to go ahead and take a look at what we've done. We've done 2 parts of this. The first part, importantly, is taking a look at the history of the rogue state empire. Now, we can take a look at the U.S. wars in the present. That's a little more difficult, and as I've talked about, having my older brother being a psychologist, he admonishes me. He tells me, Carl, you really have an almost impossible task because cognitive dissonance will have people push away challenging facts. I mean, you can take a look at the wars of the present that people recognize, and you can even take a look at the context of President Kennedy's quote from 1963, "No treaty, however much it may be to the advantage of all, however tightly it may be worded, can provide absolute security against the risks of deception and evasion." And this follows what people will recognize, what they learned in high school history of the admonishment of the founders that we have to defend our liberty, or Benjamin Franklin went so far as to predict within a few generations we would lose it. It may be easier for people to understand the rogue state empire in the present if they take a look at just little tweaks of what they're already familiar with history. And we're going to take a look at that with some quotes of history textbooks today. We had our second conversation on a rogue state empire with a simple definition, is that we're colonial bullies. Whatever resources we can take, we want them. And that includes the natural resources and the human resources to be as near to slave labor as we can get them to cooperate for. This is only possible if people are misinformed. And that's our topic today, to place it into context. There is propaganda, one set for the adults, that's corporate media, controlled by, I've heard it's down to 5 corporations now. Last I looked, it was 6, and public education. And that's where we're going to have our conversation today.
Carl, you might want to flip it to full screen because we're getting some marginal from your...
Yeah, I think it's the nice, expensive screen my computer systems engineer wife got me. Is that better?
Yeah.
All right, good. Okay. So I'm going to have this, as usual, just 3 basic talking points. One is that as an academic professional, this is my next week, I'll be beginning my 34th year in public education, and I'm asserting that bullshit is the best academic term to describe what we do with public education. So the first part is we're going to take this as a serious academic term based upon Harry Frankfurt. His work as a emeritus professor from Princeton. And then we're going to take a look at examples, taking a look at how textbooks outright lie by omission and commission. And then we're going to take at solutions that, as you and I have discussed and have really careers based upon, the foundation of education is to begin with the objective data. So we need truth. We need to have what is a whole other topic of suppressed technologies released, although many of the technologies are available right now, and a new context of love, where in contrast to the rogue state empire of seeing people as things to use, work animals to use, we unleash human cooperation and creativity. So here we go on our first topic. To consider bullshit is the most accurate academic term to describe what we do. And as always, Jim, anytime, just go ahead and jump in. People need to know about Harry Frankfurt, who, and you may have more information about this, my understanding is that he's considered to be the most recognized and the most honored living philosopher in the United States. He's retired from Princeton. He was also at Yale. And he re-updated an essay that he wrote, I think it was 40 years previous to this, and the title was On Bullshit. And I listened to 4 or 5 interviews that Frankfurt gave, and he said, look, what philosophers do is the following. We point to what is obvious to see and yet unrecognized. What we do as philosophers is understand the human condition, and that if people could recognize what is right there in front of them to see, they can respond to it. If they cannot recognize it, then they are irresponsible at the effect and will be victimized by it. And Frankfurt's conclusion of having an entire career, I think he updated this book when he was in his late 70s, was that bullshit, especially in politics, is all Americans receive. And the definition of bullshit is a saying of whatever is necessary to manipulate public opinion. If I can go ahead and summarize it, it's lies of omission and commission. So bullshitters and political leaders, if they have something that is helpful for the truth, if they have facts, they'll use them. But it's always manipulated because they leave out the facts that will go ahead and make them look bad, like the facts pointing to a rogue state empire, and will demonstrate from textbooks. And if there are no facts available, they'll just make shit up. They're going to take the package of whatever combination of rhetoric will produce the intended result of bullshit, which is to manipulate people's opinion for a desired point of view to allow the rogue state empire to continue.
Well, just to undermine a point that's implicit in what you're saying, since Operation Mockingbird and the CIA's infestation of the mainstream media, I would say today we're getting 90% of bullshit from ABC, NBC, CBS. CNN is an exemplar, virtually 100%, close behind MSNBC, to promote a political agenda that's at great deviance with the best interests of the American people, but represents the CIA's efforts to expand its powers and to control the course of events abroad as well as here at home, where unfortunately Barack Obama laid a foundation for matters getting much worse when, using the instrument of the NDAA for 2013, he nullified the Smith-Mutt Act of 1948, which precluded using the same techniques of propaganda and disinformation within the United States were used without. We're being inundated today with a series of false flags, including Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, most recently Charlottesville. Carl, it breaks my heart to see the American people being so massively deceived by the media that in the past they have been able to count upon for accurate reporting, because today it's virtually all bullshit.
Agreed. And that's really the service that we're providing as professionals. We make factual assertions that this is obvious for anybody who cares to look. And people like you and I exist in numbers that we're too many to ignore, and yet too few to do anything other than, like in the analogy of the emperor's new clothes, we can point and speak clearly and then just say, look, am I wrong? Isn't it not true that the emperor is there without clothes? So I appreciate Professor Frankfurt for having bullshit be an academic term. We're going to go ahead and run with it, and let's take a look at our first example in U.S. history. I'm a national board certified teacher in history, government, economics. I'm credentialed in mathematics. The first section that we did in talking about the history of the rogue state empire took a look at key aspects of history that people already recognize. They know the familiar outlines of the story, and we added a few facts that pointed that the understanding is that people receive is just bullshit. And here's example one. The United States in the war from 1846, and it was complete by 1848, we stole almost half of Mexico. Now, I've looked at over a dozen textbooks, and last summer when I wrote this series on education as bullshit, I took the books that were available along with taking a look at ones that I had at home. And we need to understand that war with Mexico, this is what our students are being taught in United States history, modern America. In California, U.S. history is going to be for 11th graders. And let's review what the book says. Do you want?
You'd like me to read part of it? Conflict erupts with Mexico. Westward expansion brought the United States into conflict with Mexico. The United States annexed Texas as a state in 1845. The following year, a dispute over the boundary between Texas and Mexico led to the outbreak of war. Some Northerners opposed the Mexican-American War, viewing it as an attempt to extend slavery. Still, the United States won a quick victory. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo set the Rio Grande as the southern boundary of Texas. Mexico also agreed to cede an immense expanse of land to the United States, including California and parts of other Southwest states, such as Arizona and New Mexico.
All right, so we're going to take a look at the bullshit here and the choice of language. Now, I remember in high school, and you can take a look, and I invite our audience to feel back when you were sitting in a chair in high school and reading stuff like this and getting the overall impression of somehow that something's wrong with this. There's a reason that high school students are uninspired. This is not how you communicate. Conflict erupts with Mexico using a passive voice. Westward expansion brought. Well, that's kind of a lie of omission when you take out the part that the United States violated literally 600 treaties with Native Americans in order to take that land. An outbreak of war, a dispute over the boundary. Mexico agreed to cede, and we did cover this, Jim, that what is being left out is an agreement, a treaty that, according to Article 6 in the Constitution, is the supreme law of the land. This area that was taken over was promised to be Mexico forever, and that is left out of the story. That isn't a mistake that any competent person with the history would make. This is an intentional choice to leave out the agreement that was signed by a president of the United States and agreed to and ratified by 2/3 of the Senate. So
clearly to sanitize the history of this development to make the United States appear to have clean hands.
And this is throughout the textbook. And, you know, I'm just taking a look at some of the case studies for this, and there are abundant examples from the textbook here that are not errors. It's bullshit to Disneyfy the history in order to whitewash it so that the present will remain veiled as the rogue state empire. If the history was clearly documented that this is what the United States has done in the past, while history doesn't guarantee the present, it is where to place your money for the first explanation of what's going on in the present. All right, so there are more examples in U.S. history book here that people at their interest or go ahead and they're welcome to look through. Actually, I think I do want to mention, since we did talk about to make the connection to World War I, and that there's a remarkable passage, Jim, in the textbook of World War I, where the authors of the textbook attempt to read President Wilson's mind with his desire for peace. This is extraordinary, of claims that he desired peace, attempted to end the conflict, he wanted peace, wanted to remain at peace. And then with what we talked about before with the Zimmerman telegram, they have to bullshit us in the Americans wanting peace when it was the United States that declared war on Germany despite no threat to security. The Germans announced that they would go ahead and sink any commercial vessels that approached Great Britain, which was basically the same threat that the British had. And people are going to be smart enough, depending upon their interest, to go ahead and look through this and apply this critical thinking with how these events are framed. Let's go ahead and go on to our next topic. So we have government. I think that we've established the lies of omission and commission for the rogue state to continue in government with a violation of treaties. There's documentation within here to see how that's framed, and that the United States had no choice but to go to the current wars because of 9/11. We talked about economics. I am a credentialed math teacher, and I want to take a look at what our textbooks teach our children. So Jim, my younger brother also teaches mathematics. I teach mathematics. And when we began teaching mathematics in our career, my father, who owned his own engineering company, asked us, hey, if you ever figure out why math is taught the way that it does, because it's really inconsistent with what engineers do, please explain it to me. And my younger brother and I never could explain this choice of structure, and I'll go ahead and point it out, and hopefully this will make sense. So mathematics is very powerful as the language of reality, Jim. If you get hard data, it helps people solve problems. But what you remember from school, and I'm confident the audience will remember, is you get these word problems that are contrived. Now, the language in the current textbooks has escalated, Jim, to claim that these are real-world problems. And they'll repeat that phrase in every module. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of these so-called claimed real-world problems. In my classes, Jim, we don't even solve these so-called real-world word problems, we do analysis with the wording so that students can make an argument and come up with 3 reasons why or why not they are real-world problems. The textbooks that I have don't give a definition for mathematics. They don't define algebra. We know that algebra is the #1 reason why students fail to graduate from both high school and college. We know from the data that if you take a look at adults working, 99% plus never use a mathematics formula. I teach at a high school with a little less than 2,000 students. So if we extrapolate that data, we know that among the, let's just call it 2,000 students at our campus, only about 20 are going to need algebraic formulas. We could offer it as an elective. We know that at the same time, I tell my students that you really should play this game of getting an education because it is worth $1 to $2 million. And at the same time, you need to validate students that they are indeed seeing something in algebra, trigonometry, and calculus that they've never seen an adult use. Whenever an adult walks into the room, Jim, I ask them, hey, by the way, have you ever needed algebra for a real world problem or trigonometry or calculus? Universally, the adults get a little embarrassed. They try to think of an example, and then most of them are too embarrassed just to simply say the truth. But eventually I get there where they say, why, no, I never have.
Well, there's an interesting difference between pure and applied mathematics, Carl. Of course, pure mathematics is dealing with abstractions, can include irrational numbers, perfect spheres, perfect cubes, and the like. Applied mathematics using numbers for quantitative measurements in the physical world. Knowledge in pure mathematics can be certain because you're dealing with abstractions. Knowledge in practical mathematics, however, is empirical and uncertain. It's a fascinating difference. For the most part, your students may not need to know the distinction, but I've discovered it's of great importance even in a context like computer science, because some formalists within the discipline have argued that, for example, if you can construct a formal proof of a program to demonstrate that it's formally correct, you can guarantee what will happen when a computer exercises that program, which is a category mistake because a computer in the world is a causal mechanism that could be affected by a surge of power, a component going out, and so forth. So that even if you have a flawless program, that cannot guarantee what will happen when the computer executes a program, which is contingent about a whole host of causal variables that the formal proof cannot attach.
My wife works with those issues as a systems engineer and analyst every day. At the same time, I do tell my students that math is essentially important as the language of science, the study of the real world, that algebra really is the language of shape, and we should be very curious about literally the geometry, and that geometry is the study of shape, algebra is its language, and we really should pursue how nature creates. And there is valuable work that our students would be interested in if it were given that context. But now we need to contrast it with what our students actually receive in these word problems where they are appropriately not inspired. So let's get to a couple of examples here. All right, let's do this one. So our students are given this problem. A person standing on a second floor balcony drops keys to a friend standing below the balcony. The keys are dropped from a height of 10 feet. The height and feet of the keys as they fall is given by this function, where t is the time in seconds since the keys were dropped. The friend catches the keys at the height of 4 feet. Find the elapsed time before the keys were caught. So our students receive this their entire school life. And I tell them, look, we're going to take this problem seriously. And we solve some of them and we apply the mathematics to some of them. But with this, for our assessments, the students have to come up with 3 reasons why or why not it wouldn't be a real world problem. And it takes a while for them to become unstupefied because it's so inspiring. But when they actually take a look, they find some amazing things. So this is a claim, and I tell them, draw a picture. I mean, the people who apply math in engineering and science, we draw pictures all the time so we can take this seriously and see what's going on. So let's take a look at the factual claims of these authors who say this happened in the real world. And these are some of the responses my students found. Does this person live in a mini Lego home? What second floor balcony is only 10 feet off the ground? And what's the point of this? Maybe it takes a second. The keys are falling just 6 feet. How will this help me and why should we care? And that they really see that for ordinary people, it doesn't matter what fraction of a second it takes, and really that the authors are lying to us. They didn't see this. This didn't happen in the real world. And this isn't a problem that people cares about. A problem that people would care about would be ending poverty or making sure everyone has health care or a good job. So we begin to shatter the illusion that our students have and begin to validate that their boredom may have a cause. And this is just what they receive, one problem after another, not in the real world. They make them up. So the idea that education, public education, is bullshit are lies of omission and commission in order to create a desired outcome. And I would say, from my observation, in order for the rogue state empire to continue, the desired result is you have to have students look away from the real world, to be stupefied, to be bored from it, to be given so much bullshit that they can't discern reality from the spin that they're receiving.
Just to make a comment on the side, I think students today are very undisciplined, they're very lazy. You're talking about an elementary question in physics, in fact.
Yes.
And you know, the fact is they don't want to come to grips with it. They don't have the concentration, the focus, and they're willing to offer any kind of explanation where their alternatives actually are the bullshit, in this case, coming from the students who are resisting solving an intellectual challenge over which in the past in the United States, an 8th grade student could have solved this in 1850.
Yes, yes, there's always paradoxes to work through too. My observation, Jim, is that our students, and the top students, still are enthusiastic to do this work. Let's get that straight. If you have educated parents who are successful and reasonably happy, the children will feel that there's a legitimate path to go by. The students who come from families that are poor, and we looked at some of that economic data in our previous discussion, when they take a look at this and they don't see any connection to the world that they know and live, they become appropriately discouraged. And when you add it up, that we can definitely prove that these authors of the textbooks aren't referencing the real world in so-called real-world problems, that they're creating trivial puzzles that they make up, then it compounds the difficulty. But I think that what they want is they want a confused population coming out of school who are much more likely to surrender control to an outside world that they conclude that they really don't care much about and they don't understand. I think that's the purpose of the bullshit.
Just a comment about mathematics. We have 3 levels of description. We have qualitative, comparative, and quantitative. Qualitative, for example, Jack is tall, gives you a certain impression, but it's not very precise. If you say Jack is taller than Jill, then of course you have more information about the height of Jack. But if you say that Jack is 6 feet 1 inches tall, then you can get very exact. And it's more highly testable hypothesis to determine whether or not Jack is a certain exact height than it is even to tell whether Jack is taller than Jill, though that's normally not difficult if you can put them in suitable proximity. But to merely say Jack is tall, otherwise unspecified, is of course vague and nebulous, and it would be difficult to refute, to falsify, or to verify at that level of generality of language.
I like how you're talking, Jim. My father was an engineer. My wife is an engineer. In the work that I did with results, we worked with literally hundreds of the world's best problem solvers. You and I, who apply mathematics for solving and understanding conditions that are important to work with, we love the power of mathematics to make reality clear, to quantify what we can go ahead and qualify it, but you really need to quantify stuff to really know how much of what you have. And if you really spent some time taking a look at how our children are taught based upon the textbooks written by alleged experts, which really are filtered through the same companies that give us corporate media, you would be disgusted at the types of problems given our children which discourage them and are not inspiring about solving anything that would make a difference in their lives.
Yeah, it's very embarrassing that students really seem to be resistant to learning, Carl, I gotta say. This is my global impression. Mm-hmm. I think it has to do a lot with television. It has to do with the internet. It has to do with iPhones. It has to do with the cell phones. It has to do with their constant ability to interact with one another wherever they may be in the world, and a disinclination to devote the time and effort that's required to actually obtain an education, which, as you well know, is hard work. Most American students today aren't really enthusiastic about anything that's hard. They want something that's simple, convenient, and easy, which is what they're by and large all about.
I think that part of what the purpose of the bullshit is to produce that condition. And as a classroom teacher, we do embrace that condition and then attempt to offer a choice that in the areas where students are interested, they certainly find areas to be motivated for. They have passions. Things are important to them. And at the same time, they exist in a society of the empire. And that is tremendously discouraging. Let's take a look at our next topic here, which will be the third example of what passes for leadership on our campuses. And this is typically going to be a leadership class or an associated student body. These are the elected officers for student leadership. The classes in the high schools and the middle schools and even the elementary schools devolves this opportunity for leadership into an entertainment committee. The actual work of an ASB class is with dances and athletics. Now, Jim, I have no problem with good entertainment and athletics. I love it. But when that substitutes for leadership, and what leadership will do is prioritize what's most important to take a look at. So if we take a look at this topic that we're discussing of public education and put the frame of what leadership would look like, we would take a look at the most important conditions for the quality of human life that we could apply mathematics to and quantify. And in terms of the condition of the rogue state empire, as we've discussed, we're living on a planet with tremendous technological capabilities, and yet what we're given by the so-called developed nations, the so-called former colonial powers, are policies of war, poverty, and debt that we can count the cost to of annual millions killed, billions harmed, and trillions looted. Now, that cries out for leadership. We discussed in the economic data that 40% of American children live at least a year in official poverty. And our leaders in our high schools are working on dances and sports rallies. That is a distraction and a bullshit expression of what leadership, the opportunity of what leadership could provide. If we take a look and we match this into our own experience of what you and I are doing and our colleagues and friends, Jim, is we really are going before. The definition of lead is we're really showing the way. So we're giving possibilities for what really must be addressed in order to have the maximum benefits of life. So we have the dances and athletics through leadership. And they have community service. You may recall, and anybody who is watching this, who is a student or a parent or a teacher, understands that ASB and the officers will organize events for like a food can drive or doing something for charity, which is very nice. At the same time, I've never seen anyone embrace the bigger picture to understand, like, for example, with a food can drive, we could end the problem. If you raise money for underprivileged kids to get health care, we could end the problem with universal health care. And most educators, Jim, we give lip service to people like Gandhi, King, and the American founders. But when it really comes down to taking a look at the issues that, let's stick with Martin Luther King, that he really worked for, what is missing, what is omitted is, in the example of Martin King, which you and I discussed, I guess, a few years ago now, the last year of his life, Dr. King took on the empire to end his version of our wars, which was the Vietnam War. And within actually a year to the day that he gave a speech announcing this, and just before the summer of 1968, where he planned to take 1 million people to occupy Washington, D.C., until that war was ended and those resources redirected for the good of Americans, he was assassinated by the rogue state, as proved by the King family civil trial.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that, in fact, actually, Martin Luther King wasn't killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel. He was rushed in an ambulance to a hospital more distant than necessary, where a racist physician had guaranteed to finish him off. And when he was brought in, this doctor chased everyone out of the room and smothered him to death with a pillow. William Pepper and Ole has explained all this, and I've done interviews with Ole Damagard about it. If you look for them on The Real Deal, Ole Damagard on the death of Martin Luther King, it's profoundly disturbing, Carl.
Yeah. And if you think about how our opponents work, Jim, they really are, they apply their education for the means that they want. And as somebody who was in the military as you, this idea of contingency planning and really being thorough and really laying out what you want to accomplish. So let's say that you do want to assassinate Dr. King because he's become too much of a threat to reveal the empire. You have a plan A, which is to go ahead and shoot and kill him, but you always are thorough to plan out to make sure you accomplish what you intend to accomplish. If he isn't killed by the bullet, then you need to be able to take him to a location where you'll have a backup plan to achieve the result of his death, which, as you're saying, is relatively new information about how he actually died.
Tragic, but true.
Uh-huh. So this is actually going faster than I thought. Is there another topic in this list that you want to discuss, Jim?
Well, would you like to play the Harry Frankfurt 5-minute? That might be worth actually watching to kick into the, yeah.
All right, here we go.
People should care about the truth because the truth is the truth about how things are. And it's important for us to recognize how things are, not to pretend that it's something else. If you have the truth, you know what reality is like. If you don't, you're ignorant of reality. There's a lot of activity in which the truth is not particularly respected, in which its importance is actively denied. We are living in an age in which there's another alternative to the truth, and that's bullshit. The reason why there's so much bullshit, I think, is that people just talk. If they don't talk, they don't get paid. The advertiser wants to gain sales. The politician wants to gain votes. Now, that's okay, but they have to talk about things they don't really know much about. So since they don't have anything really valid to say, they just say whatever they think will interest the audience or make it appear that they know what they're talking about. And what comes out is bullshit. The bullshitter is more creative. He's not submissive.
Greetings, my friend.
It's not important to him what the world really is like. What's important to him is how he would like to represent himself. He takes a more adventurous and inventive attitude towards reality, which may be sometimes very colorful and sometimes amusing. Sometimes it might produce results that are enjoyable, but it's also very dangerous.
This country is in big trouble. We don't win anymore.
Liars attempt to conceal the truth by substituting something for the truth that isn't true. Bullshit is not a matter of trying to conceal the truth. It's a matter of trying to manipulate the listener. And if the truth will do, then that's fine. And if the truth won't do, then that's also fine. So the bullshitter is indifferent to the truth in a way in which the liar is not. He's playing a different game. Another reason why I think bullshit is a more insidious opponent or threat to the truth is that it's less identifiable. I mean, the lie makes a specific move, and it can be uncovered or revealed. Bullshitter is vague. It doesn't. You can't put your finger on it. What's wrong with it? What is going on? Why is it objectionable? Politicians lie and bullshit constantly. When they're caught in a lie, there's a great commotion. There's no corresponding response to bullshit. There's no finding it out. There's no uncovering it. Insofar as bullshit is accepted, insofar as it's regarded as normal, I think it tends to undermine the respect for truth. It has become the norm to a considerable extent in my country at any rate. There's something like 99.8% of the qualified scientists in the world tell us that we're having a serious effect on the climate. That's an established scientific fact. I don't think there can be any question about it.
Because climate change is not science. It's religion.
But a lot of politicians deny it. They just say it's not true. It's lies. It's an attempt on the part of tree huggers to prevent economic development. It's just bullshit. It comes close to being a lie. But I think a lot of politicians don't know enough about the science to know that it is a lie. They just assume that it must be a lie because it doesn't fit into their political or economic agenda. The assertion that something has been established scientifically no longer carries the same weight that it used to carry. So that's the danger, that there will be a loss of concern for the truth. And that, I think, is an insidious assault on one of the fundamental principles of society. If you have the truth, you know what reality is like. If you don't, you're ignorant of reality. And I don't know whether it's important to explain why reality is important. We live in the real world. We depend upon it. We need it. We need to know about it. We need to be able to find our way around in it. And if we don't have the truth, then we can't do those things. We don't really need bullshit. In fact, bullshit I find very offensive. And it's insulting. It is offered to me as though it were an attempt to convey the truth, but it's not. It's a substitute for the truth. And I don't want substitutes. I want the real thing, as I think all of us should. All of us must. That's why we should be on our guard against it, and resist it, and reject it, wherever we find it. I think a world without bullshit would be more interesting. It would be a world in which we would lack the creative flair of the bullshitter, but in which we would have the fascination and the wonderment of reality. And in that way, I think the world would be much better off.
like a thing a lot, but Harry presented with that.
Well, let me say a few words, Carl.
Please, yeah.
There's some key terms here that need to be addressed. Reality could be defined as the way things are, including past, present, future. So that's in a timeless sense. Where a sentence or a theory is true when it corresponds to the way things are, and otherwise is false. That could be referred to as the definition of truth, the criterion of what is true. In other words, the evidential indicators upon which we rely to determine what is true don't provide a guarantee of the discovery of truth, but they have to do with a coherence of the information available to us from multiple sources in order to seek to sort out what is true. And I'd like to offer an illustration, insofar as we have the time opportunity here to do so, of this Charlottesville event, because we're being told by the mainstream media that this was a right-wing rebellion, that they were acting as though they were Nazis, that this group calling itself Antifa, or the Autonomous Anti-Nazis, were in the right, and those who were protesting about the removal of the statue of Robert E. Lee were wrong. And I'd just like to share with you the result of a study I've done about Charlottesville for us to discuss as an example of the way in which the media is bombarding us with bullshit. Would that work for you?
Please.
Greetings. Welcome to a Truth Be Told special report. I'm Dean Ryan, and today I'm joined by Professor James Fetzer. Many of you know that a developing story has been happening in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's involved a rally called Unite the Right. And there's been many groups involved, the KKK, white nationalists, Black Lives Matter, and Antifa. Jim, I want to jump right into this because people across the country, even the world, are in great panic of what we have witnessed over our television, social media, and all over the news of a car that plowed into a group of protesters, killing one and injuring more than 15. Jim, what do we know at this time with this story as it develops?
Well, Dean, there are increasing signs that this was a false flag attack, very cleverly staged, even including photoshopped images. Look at this, which is the image that was sent around the world. You have protesters flying in the air, this fellow in the foreground with red sneakers, all these signs. New York Times, car hits crowd after white nationalist rally in Charlottesville ends in violence. But the anti-New York Times has raised questions. Real attack? Perhaps. Are talented acrobats and a bunch of flying sneakers used to stage a video? Notice how lean and fit the two somersaulting pedestrians are. And note the occult numerology in the license plate, 1111. And I gotta say, Dean, there turns out to be a lot of reason for their skepticism.
Sure.
Here is one of the first indications something was wrong, namely the fellow in the lower right, James Field, who's alleged to be the driver, doesn't really look like the driver. Another is this fellow in the upper right-hand corner, who is Johnny on the spot, turns out to be a CIA agent who just happened to be there, Dean. Look at this.
Really?
Yeah. Here you have this James A. Field in the lower right who wears tinted glasses. He was there earlier in the day in footage. He's wearing those glasses. Notice the driver is not wearing glasses. That's very odd all by itself. Also, this fellow James G. Field in the upper right, who's 32 years old and a military veteran who commands a battalion in Ohio, looks very much like the driver. Very much more so than James A. Field. So we have this brilliant video study I highly recommend. Charlottesville false flag theory, something strange is going on. And that's not the half of it, Dean. If we go forward, look at this. She has discovered two different vehicles were used. A Dodge Challenger or Charger. One has a black stripe on the right. The other has no stripe on the left. And Dean, I must say, one of the most stunning to me aspects of this was that after the purported crash, he backed out with preternatural speed. It was just astonishing how the driver behind the scene was able to drive that vehicle backwards at high speed. This seems to me highly inconsistent with the patsy, James Akefield, who's reported to be schizophrenic and under antipsychotic medication. But it's worse than that, Dean. It appears this very photograph actually was photoshopped, that they added the background with all the signs and the flying stuntmen there. Because look, here's from the actual footage of the crash. Look at the background there. You don't see any of those signs present. And this is just moments before this takes place. You can see the whole video in that particular study, Charlottesville false flag theory.
Very interesting, Jim.
It is, Dean. And here's another circumstance that's terribly troubling. The police were told to stand down in Charlottesville and did nothing as a war broke out.
Let me just chime in real quick, Jim. I got to tell you, watching this story live from all the live streams during the event, I certainly, the police seemed very passive, which is very unusual in this day and age. Police are very aggressive. So you raise a good point. I saw no police involvement stopping any of this from happening. And as my reports from yesteryears have proved, that as LAPD have told me undercover, that they want a riot. They want disruption to bring in martial law. Do you think that's kind of what we were seeing take place the other day?
Oh, I think this was a deliberate provocation by forces behind the scene who are allied with George Soros, Hillary Clinton, Obama holdovers. This is a very sinister event. I think that it's also got aspects that are reasonably blatant, such that if it becomes exposed, the American public are going to realize what they're up against. Here's one sign, Dean. Report out of Charlottesville. The events that unfolded in Charlottesville this Saturday were tragic, hateful, insidious, even deadly. Saturday will go down in history as the day America's hate reared its ugly face and proved to the world this country is being divided to be conquered. Adding fuel to the fire of hatred and violence were politicians who told police not to intervene and allow the unchecked carnage to unfold before their eyes. Dean, when you look into the politicians, the political figures in Virginia, the mayor of Virginia, the governor of Virginia, others involved here, they're all hard left Hillary partisans who would be glad to participate in an event that would tarnish Donald Trump. The stand-down order was confirmed by the ACLU, who quoted a police source saying, "will not interfere until given command to do so." This command never came. Not only that, Dean, but it appears some of the organizers suspect themselves. Here's from the Daily Stormer, which organized about Richard Spencer being a key who was being dragged out of the park by military cops. It's pretty fascinating because this guy, Richard Spencer, has a dubious background. Here's a different report from the anti-New York Times that he doesn't tolerate anti-gay views at his events, but his pedigree seems more establishmentarian than rebel, having graduated from St. Mark's elite prep school in Dallas before moving on to Duke. His election night rallying cry of "Hail Trump" and occasional use of German terms stink of contrived imposterism. And here we have a very strange, unearthed old photo of him and his wife posing with Laura Bush, which I think raises a complete concern that this guy is a huge...
Oh, absolutely, Jim. And if I may add, I always thought Richard Spencer was a total informant, used to almost break up the libertarian movement that's been on the rise in the United States since the entrance of Ron Paul. What about Kessler, Jim? Is this another suspect of interest?
You put your finger right on it. White supremacist leader in Charlottesville, Jason Kessler, was an Obama supporter and an Occupy protester. Get this. White supremacist and Unite the Right leader Jason Kessler was once reported a supporter of former President Obama in the Occupy movement. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, an organization certainly no friend to conservatives, Kessler revealed his political transformation around November of 2016, the month then candidate Donald Trump won the presidential election. It looks to me like he was a sleeper. He was used to infiltrate this movement so he could be exploited on this occasion, Dean.
Right.
I mean, somebody does not turn from being an Obama supporter into being a white nationalist. That's simply unheard of.
Jim, it's like a vegan turning extreme carnivore.
That's right. That's a perfect analogy, Dean. And get this. There are a lot of holdovers from Hillary Clinton's Department of State that were involved in Charlottesville. The Department of State is now in the process of expunging the names of people who were involved in Charlottesville from its website. But enough information was caught already to nail them badly. I posted the terror attack was not done by a 20-year-old patsy. It was instead done by a 32-year-old seasoned military veteran. Now it's been proven the car used was not owned by the driver. Instead, it was provided by the U.S. government. It's a similar model, but not exact. The car the accused actually owned had a sunroof, clearly a matter of state record, and the car used in the terror attack did not. So we have a swapping out driver using a different car. We have holdovers from Hillary's State Department commenting on it and then getting expunged from the news because they're not supposed to be there. And people will start asking why. What about that 1111 license plate? A key player is this guy here, Brennan Gilmore. This is a tweet reflecting that the State Department was involved in Charlottesville and is trying to cover up. This guy has a very interesting history, Dean. Get this. He worked for the CIA in Africa. This is the guy, Johnny on the spot, took photographs, interviewed by CNN, MSNBC. He is an op. Here's another report. It turns out he was a chief of staff, Brennan Gilmore, for a candidate for the governor who, guess what, Dean? George Soros gave $250,000 to Tom Pirarello for the Virginia primary bid. So this guy, who just happened to be there, was a chief of staff for a gubernatorial candidate who got $250,000 from George Soros and who also coincidentally is a CIA undercover op. I mean, this is very stunning stuff.
Incredible. And Jim, there's reports that, and there were so many reports the day this event happened, there's reports that a police helicopter crashed nearby the actual rally. And I think that's something that's kind of been underreported, that's kind of been caught in the saturation of the polarized event. What do we know about that?
That's a great point, Dean, because here we have a story about these guys. They were monitoring the event. There's speculation that they could have been taken down and, according to the official narrative, killed because they knew what had happened, that there'd been two cars, that this was a staged event. On the other hand, Dean, when I look at the crash height, and I've looked at a lot in relation to my research on 9/11, because we had claims that planes had crashed in Shanksville and there was no debris whatsoever. Planes had crashed hit the Pentagon. There was none of the massive pile of aluminum debris from a 100-ton airliner there either. And when I look at this footage, it's very unclear to me that although this is supposed to be the fiery aftermath of the police helicopter crash in Charlottesville, that the chopper exploded in a ball of flames in a residential neighborhood. I gotta say, I'm not quite convinced that this was bona fide, Dean. Further research, no doubt, will give us more on this aspect of the story.
Very interesting. I want to change lanes real quick. Some are saying this is not only the catalyst to almost trample free speech events across the nation, but this is another tactic to send another death blow to the President of the United States. Is this going to be the Trojan horse, if you will, that's going to take down President Trump and anyone or anybody that supports him?
Well, let me give you several stories that would tend to substantiate what you're suggesting. The radical left, funded by George Soros, is planning more racially fueled attacks. Remember, we had during the campaign, Soros was using Black Lives Matter to disrupt and foment violence at Donald Trump efforts. This organization, calling it the Anonymous Anti-Fascism Group, appears to be, in fact, the embodiment of fascism. It's very clever that they would attack as neo-Nazis those who were protesting the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee, who was a national icon, a great American. under the guise that they were undemocratic or anti-American, when it's they themselves finance the rabid liberal left, a great name for them, who are very violent and have even made death threats against Trump for some time now. That's part of the story. Here's more. Now the alt-left is demanding that New York Museum remove a statue of Teddy Roosevelt. Can you imagine anything more insane than that? Here we get a report about it. The alt-left is demanding the New York Museum remove a Teddy Roosevelt statue. The Daily Wire reported the protest organizers, NYC stands with Standing Rock and decolonize this place, also called for Columbus Day to be renamed Indigenous Peoples Day. What we're talking about, Dean, here is trying to destroy icons that represent the history of the United States. If we no longer have access to our identity, we lose our character as a nation. Donald Trump has spoken out quite brilliantly about this, asking what's next. Are we going to take down statues of Thomas Jefferson, for example, who had slaves, or George Washington, who had slaves? There are those who are attacking him from the left for not being strong enough in condemning the so-called extremists on the right. But it looks as though this whole thing was engineered and manufactured by extremists on the left. Most stunningly, here's the latest report, Dean. Bombshell connection between Charlottesville, Soros, CIA, same players involved in Ukraine overthrow, working behind the scenes to house Trump. Published by IWB. This has just come out. Stunning, stunning stuff, Dean.
Very incredible times, Jim, indeed. Credible time in history. Well, I want to conclude it there, Jim, because in essence, if anybody is putting this all together, there's a racial divide that's being pushed by the corporate controlled media, pushed by outside influences from all over the world. And, you know, in my lifetime, Jim, we've had the greatest racial harmony ever since the 1960s. And it's really sad to see that being destroyed by a false narrative being pushed by people that are really not pro-America or pro-free people. So I want to conclude it there, Jim. I want to thank you for joining us today here on the Truth Be Told Special Report. For Jim Fetzer, this is Dean Ryan. Please stay awake, and we'll see you on the other side.
Let me see if I've got it this time, Dean.
I hope so. I hope so.
I can't make any promises. I'll just see what happens. Carl, to me, that's a perfect example where the media is shoveling bullshit by the bucket load, and it's a serious matter because there's an effort now going on to deconstruct the historical identity of the United States by removing statues and icons of our history. Where we had accepted the facts of the Civil War, we were long past it, but now it appears to me that George Soros and the holdovers from Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and others are trying to stir up a situation that might even precipitate a race war. So when Harry Frankfurt talks about bullshit, it's not just an abstract concept. We're in the midst of it. We're being smothered by bullshit today.
And it is deadly serious. If we embrace the facts that we've already discussed, this empire is literally killing in the millions every year. If people go ahead and embrace the history and the findings of the King family civil trial, anybody who stands up to the empire, if they need to, I don't think that they like to take them out by assassination, because the evidence is part of our strongest way to expose and reveal the empire. But yeah, corporate media, that is the bullshit propaganda arm for adults, to be sure.
It's tragic. I know you want to add a few further thoughts before we conclude this session, so please proceed, Carl.
All right, let's do it. The solution for where education is going to go. So this is what I see, Jim. There will be some sort of a breakthrough event where the rogue state empire will be identified, the leaders shall be arrested and removed from power, and for most Americans, they're going to be in shock because they didn't see this coming. There will be a need to reorientate public education, and the basic solution for what I'm pointing to is pretty much just truth, technology, and love. You and I are committed as academic professionals that the objective facts will lead our discussion into understanding reality. We're going to find that there's been much technology that has been suppressed. We've been promised since the 1950s 20-hour work weeks. We looked at our section of economics, that resource-based economics, we can have the most beautiful, energy productive, not using energy, but producing energy cities. And what every good educator applies to our ability to communicate our subject fields is an empathy with all of humanity and all of Earth's inhabitants, in contrast to what the empire does, is to be able to consider everything as some sort of a work animal or a subhuman to use and extract the most amount of profit from. So once we get this breakthrough that's unpredictable to us now of exactly how it would occur, we'll be able to explain it later, the professional educators will actually be in pretty good shape merely to apply the academic standards that you and I are pointing to already are there to be able to discern reality from bullshit, and then just to go ahead and good faith effort repair what education had devolved into and back into an institute where our best ideas move forward.
Excellent, excellent thoughts, Carl. And I must say, as a Charlottesville event exhibits, but which I found again and again in my research on JFK, 9/11, Wellstone, Sandy Hook, and other events, you have to be able to separate the authentic events from the inauthentic, the bona fide from the fabricated. Once that's done, sorting things out to figure out what actually happened is not such a difficult task. I just want to thank you, Carl, for your inspired idea to have this series about the history of the rogue empire state that the United States has become. And I look forward to part 4, which we'll record in the near future.
Perfect.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
That's what we were told. Most Americans never believed Lee Oswald was the lone gunman, for excellent reasons. In fact, there were at least 6 shooters who fired from 8 to 10 shots or more who are identified here. We have, finally, the solution to the greatest murder mystery in history, laid out for the world to see, proof after proof after proof. Photos were faked, the body was changed, x-rays were altered, the home movies were fixed. 15 experts contribute to a 529-page book with 1,037 photos and diagrams in black and white and color.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you'd like JFK, who, how, and why, and would like to support the new JFK show, then go to patriotradiobooks.com. That's patriotradiobooks.com.